So, you state a political opinion and people go a little bit crazy. But alright, let's talk about some elaborations on my video from yesterday, or whenever this video is coming out. This one and many others in this series are gonna be a simple video with no editing, because this time I'm very tired, and most of this is opinion and stuff. We're gonna be talking about my political views. And I think that I want to let you guys know exactly where I stand on various issues to be forward from now on. You know, without relying on some kind of compass meme test. I want to be as honest as possible with you guys. And I don't like leaving very many surprises. Like, I want you to know who I am and what I believe in. So, let's start with I guess one of the more controversial opinions that I've said. In the pandemic video, I've said that healthcare was not a human right, and this is something that I do believe. Now, let me be absolutely clear. This doesn't mean that I don't think that we as a society shouldn't try and take care of the sick and dying. I don't believe that food is a human right either, but that doesn't mean I'm against things like food stamps. We have to remember that these are benefits that we as a society provide, and they're not intrinsic rights that people are just born with. For example, for me to speak in and of itself, it doesn't cost me anything or anyone else anything. In order for me to not have speech, someone else needs to actively take it away. This is generally what the basis for a right is. Rights are intrinsic. If you're in the middle of the woods, for instance, far away from society, what you still have remaining are your rights as a person. I do know that several countries do state that healthcare is a right. You know, like the United States says that guns are a right. We can say that anything is a right. By the way, on that one, I do believe that people have the right to defend themselves. I don't believe that they have the right to a specific means of defending themselves, but like this topic, that one is complicated, so we'll come back to it in another video. One topic at a time. I can't handle numerous topics at once. As a person, I'm very libertarian. That's the closest thing you can call my political beliefs. Now, while I think taxes are a bit too high, I don't think that all taxation is theft or one of those kind of libertarians. No, I just generally believe that government involvement leads to more problems than not. As a result, I don't have much faith in state-funded healthcare, at least here in the United States. And that's one thing that should be duly noted. I'm well willing to concede that state-funded healthcare works in many other countries, like the Nordic ones, Canada, the UK, and so on. And I understand that they're a very big reason that the movement for socialized medicine is so big in the United States. But what you have to understand is that the United States is very different from Europe in many ways. The most obvious one is population, and I'm talking about the population of the United States compared to any specific European country. The population of the United States overall is very similar to the population of Europe overall, but that's made up of many different smaller governments. But another one is in our demographics. The United States has one of the highest obesity rates in the world, which leads to more health problems than you get in a place like Europe. As well, we have very high rates of smoking and drinking. Socialized medicine would be vastly more expensive than anywhere else in the world, just on that alone. You know, it's not like we're Japan where it's actually hard to get fat. I've stated that state-funded healthcare is more or less like insurance. I get that that's a bit of an exaggeration, but they do have the same idea. Everyone pays into a system under the idea that not everyone will get sick, at least not all at once. That's how all of this works. If everybody got sick at once and needed treatment all at the same time, any system would crumble. Any system. So that's largely irrelevant to the debate. No health system in the world was prepared for something like this current pandemic. Also, you have to keep in mind that I'm not running defense for insurance companies. Like, I want to state on the record that I do not think that America's healthcare system is good. I mean, I don't think it's the worst in the world like some people like to state, but if you're very poor, we do have social programs that do help, and they have helped me personally in the past. And if you're rich, America's healthcare system is probably the best quality of medicine in the entire world. But if you're somewhere in the middle, I do understand that it is an enormous problem that people have to debate whether they die or go bankrupt. The system is not without problems. That's absolutely clear, and there's all sorts of things we can argue on how to improve it. I just do not have faith that government controlling healthcare is a solution on this one. One commenter on the video said that government is better because they don't have a profit drive like the insurance companies do. And this is a very complicated point. I mean, it really depends on what you mean by profit. Like, the government here does stuff for resources all the time. I mean, we have gone to war over oil, for instance, and companies lobby for extra privileges all the time. The government itself probably doesn't want any profit, but the individuals who run it most likely do. But no, the government itself does not need to turn a profit, which is a double-edged sword in and of itself, which is another video. However, what the United States government does when it does get control of a system is cut costs. This always happens. People joke about the government running the DMV so well, so that healthcare would basically run beautifully under them. That's not entirely fair, as the DMV has its own problems that isn't exactly all governmental. A better comparison is the public school system here in the United States, which is government-run. It's pretty much a joke to the rest of the developed world, even more so than our healthcare system. For example, teachers are paid very low wages. Too low. So low that it's generally more expensive to become a teacher in the long run. I know that no one asking for socialized medicine wants doctors to work for free. That is an exaggeration. But you have to understand how much doctors are actually paid here. Most specialists are very lucrative positions, and people from all over the world come to the United States to be doctors here. And I mean, there's a reason for that. And you have to keep in mind, it's very expensive to become a doctor in the United States. And it's a career that isn't without enormous risk. And no, not just from catching disease. Doctors have to have malpractice insurance, for instance. Sometimes they screw up, but this country is full of people looking for any excuse to throw in a frivolous lawsuit. And of course, many doctors don't pay for malpractice insurance. The hospitals they work for do, which drives up the cost of medicine. And doctors are not the only hospital expense. Yes, drugs are overpriced as hell, and that is a problem. But there's equipment like MRIs and X-rays that are extremely expensive. And an excess of them would probably be deemed largely unnecessary by a government bureau. I don't know how it is in the rest of the world, but when the United States government gets a hold of something, non-necessary becomes non-existent very quickly. Governmental systems have a very hard time predicting the future. They tend to only stick to the problems that are happening now, and not the what-ifs, because they can't really afford it. They have limited resources. To go back to the school example, there are many topics that are prerequisites to being able to function well in society that just aren't tackled very well or at all in American public schools. I mentioned economics back in the other video. Well, it goes into even big subjects like history. In high school, for instance, I had half a year of world history. That is it, just one semester, and 2 full years of just solely American history. And keep in mind that my state is actually one of the more left-leaning ones. I'm not from like the deep south or something. And let's not forget, the American government can be very partisan and likes to play politics with the systems that it does have. Back in the 2000s, President Bush had a beautiful idea called No Child Left Behind. This decree made it so that schools that were doing worse on standardized tests got their funding cut. This led to them doing worse, and it became a vicious cycle. Not to mention, it began the trend of more and more teaching the test, instead of actually teaching the kids and providing them with a decent education. This is because standardized tests were a metric that the United States government used to see if they were spending their money in the right location. It would be very possible for a similar fuck-up to happen in a state-controlled hospital here in the United States. If the metric becomes how many patients live, a hospital might, under the table, turn away people who are likely, but not certain to die. Because if too many of them do actually die, then the hospital will lose its funding. And not to mention, some places in the United States are very partisan. We have very blue states and very red states. Mississippi, for instance, has been heavily criticized for how it handles abortion. It has only one clinic in its entire state, and it's only because it's legally obligated to. Would you really want this government to be in total control of how abortions get done? And I'm going to take a swing at the other side too. So far, one of our glorious attempts at socialized medicine here is if you don't have insurance, you end up getting fined. So if you can't afford to get insurance, you get hit with a fine because you can't buy insurance. This is what our leaders come up with when they try to get socialized medicine for everyone here in the United States. Like I said though, the American healthcare system has plenty of problems. I'm not going to say that this country doesn't have problems, ever. It does, and I will criticize it any time of the day. It just happens more and more lately where people want any solution instead of the right solution, and that's getting more and more frustrating as time goes on. Putting in the European model, for instance, will not work in the United States. It won't. And I know this is going to be ironic considering what I just said, but I do have to defend the American healthcare system just a little bit. It has problems, but it does have perks. The American healthcare system is not the worst in the world. Like I said, if you can afford it, it is the best in the world. One thing about capitalism is that it does drive some people towards excellence. That's why capitalist countries tend to have the most innovation. The United States basically subsidizes the rest of the world's healthcare through innovation, which is only really possible in a free market. Government control breeds complacency. Like I said, non-necessary becomes non-existent. The fact that pharmaceutical can be patented, for instance, means that a profit can be made on it exclusively by a company, giving them plenty of incentive to try and discover as many of them as possible. When we hear about drugs being exorbitantly expensive, it is definitely bad, and we should do something about that. But the alternative to overpriced drugs might be the drugs not existing at all. The drugs that many other countries are getting for cheap were most likely discovered and even created here in the United States. And obviously, not every single medical advancement has been made by the United States. I'm not claiming that, but a great deal of them have been. And it's not like we don't have any state control already here in the United States over a medical system. The FDA, which I like, and I think it's a very necessary thing, demands much more rigor and is much more involved with the production of pharmaceuticals than the European equivalent, the EMA. If more tests are required, more money is required. The drug is going to have to be more expensive to turn a profit. If the FDA says no to a drug, no matter how much money is spent, the company needs to start over. Rigor leads to rising prices. So yeah, my opinion is a bit more complicated than a soundbite. But with all this said, I do not believe that healthcare is a human right. Keep in mind, I'm not saying that we should just let people die on the street. Human misery is a bad thing, and we as a society should try and prevent it. What I am saying is that we need to understand that a doctor needs to be compensated for it. The equipment he uses needs to be paid for, and the people who make and discover the drugs he uses need to break even at the very least. Declaring it a human right means that you are entitled to all of that work, and it does a disservice to all of the hard work and resources that it takes into taking care of someone's health.